Cool. Awesome. Vic, welcome home. How was the trip to Colombia?
It was amazing. It we had good weather. We were blessed with like all of the things to go the right way, so we were able to enjoy the time to the fullest, see the things in the time frame we had. So, as far as all of the external factors that can sometimes derail something like this, we were lucky enough to not really have to face too many of those. So, overall, amazing trip. Everything went rather smoothly.
Good to hear, man. Good to hear. Well, we're doing something different here. We're doing a little coffee art party, and I wanted to have somewhat of a coffee talk. And I figured since you couldn't make it down, we would do this remotely since you just got back from Colombia literally yesterday or 2 days ago at this point. And yeah, I just had a couple questions about what it's like collaborating internationally on the scale of what we do with someone like Rodrigo and what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the obvious things to say are it's super cool and rewarding to be part of a project like this. But it's not something that's without its challenges. Obviously, there's a huge language barrier. We have a huge distance in between. Um, we can't be working physically together in the same place on some of these things other than in this instance when I have an opportunity to get down there. So the some of the challenges other than that are just the repeating of a fermentation or something like that, a variation on a process, the costs it takes to send samples to me, take feedback, and do all those things in a continual way. Not that we don't try to do them. So there's definitely challenges that, if I was living right next door to Rodrigo, we could have these things move a lot faster. And then the language barrier is definitely an issue, but we do work with some amazing people at ClearPath who have really good English and are able to really translate. So Rodrigo, Elkin, and I can kind of be speaking to each other directly to each other openly
Yeah.
and have it all perfectly translated and be able to get those points of inspiration from each
Yeah.
other even though we're not directly speaking to each other.
That's awesome. And so a second ago, you said, it'd be nice to live right next door to Rodrigo and make these things move faster. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is how fast it seems like Rodrigo and his team do move, and they're constantly innovating and applying these different creative processing techniques. And it seems like I don't know, every couple months they have something new that they're releasing, and it's not like the quality is going in and out. It's pretty consistent, and it's really been hitting another level recently. And from your knowledge and your experience there, how can they produce on such a innovative level that's obviously a little risky for them so quickly?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. They are really blessed in where they're located. In southern Guia, the conditions are a lot different than they are um, throughout other parts of Colombia and other growing regions, and not necessarily just different, but the the cycle of weather is a lot more consistent. So they
Hmm.
tend to have a pretty good amount of moisture and rain throughout the season. The sunlight cycle tends to stay pretty consistent. Um, the amount of cloud cover they get, again, seems to be pretty consistent. Whereas in other regions, they have, a few weeks of dry, a few weeks of rain. Those are the types of things that force the coffee trees to start flowering or start to go to fruit and things like that. So what this means for this region that the Aromas del Sur team of Rodrigo and Elkin have their farms is that their coffee trees are in throughout the growing year are in an almost constant state of ripening. So you can have a tree that has buds on it, has a few flowers, also has green cherry as well as ripe cherry.
Oh,
So
cool.
instead of having two large harvests throughout the growing season, they're almost in a perpetual state of picking cherry and harvesting. So to your question, what that really allows them to do from the standpoint of experimentation, especially with some of these fermentations, is they have fresh cherry coming to their processing facility each week. And so they can evaluate the work that they've done in the past week or even 2 weeks on variations of processes. And they can make a little tweak and say, okay, last week we did it this way, and this was the result we want to, you know, add 12 hours of fermentation or remove 12 hours of fermentation, or not expose it to any outside light source, different things like that. And so what they get is the ability to turn around lots and lots of different fermentation experiments where, to my knowledge, a lot of folks who are able to experiment at the high end of coffee don't really get to do it in those types of cycles. They may do one large batch of fermentation during their first harvest and another
Yeah.
experiment batch towards their fly crop. But they're kind of working in two large crops, and they need to decide what they want to sell versus what they want to use and experiment. And then once they learn whatever they learn from those experimentations, then they have to wait until their following fly crop to make any tweaks that they might want to do. This is literally a week to week thing for Rodrigo and Elkin. So that's really how it seems that they're moving so quickly and
Wow.
dialing in on some of these processes, um, because they have that opportunity to almost be constantly playing with their process profiles.
That's fascinating, and that makes sense because it would mitigate some of that risk that, like, if you're investing X amount of your harvest into these experiments and that experiment doesn't go the way you'd hope, I mean, you're waiting a whole season before you're going to be able to recoup that loss, where Rodrigo's able to do it on a weekly basis. That's super fascinating. Does he? Is there any other measures that he's taking as far as mitigating other risks with doing these experimental fermentations? Like, obviously, you sent some pictures of a lab process where it seems like he's doing small batch fermentations and things like that. How different, like, how does he scale these things? How does did you get any insight in how he chooses what to move on to the next level?
I mean, a lot of that depends on the market. Like I said, there's if if I lived down there, I'd be able to try the coffees each week with them, give them the feedback from the US market. We rely on him sending samples up and working in that way. So at the end of the day, a lot of it is, what they think is successful, and the way they kind of inform themselves about that is by feedback from roasting partners across the world to see how different markets will take to different products, different profiles. Um, you know, the majority of the coffee that Rodrigo is selling into the Asian market is not necessarily his most popular coffees that he's selling into the North American market.
Makes
So
sense.
these experiences of people coming on farm visits and being able to give as much feedback in real time with the full understanding of what's happening at the farm. Like when I was just there, able to cup 60 coffees with them, of new processes that don't even have names. They've just got numbers associated with them, because, you know, they're not even sure they're going to keep
Yeah,
these processes. So why bother naming them or branding them yet?
absolutely.
So, um, it's heavily reliant on the feedback from coffee roasters who are, giving their thoughts on the feedback from the coffee roasters consumers in each
Yeah.
market.
That totally makes sense. So, as far as the other side of the input when you were down there, I know you were working on some kind of special projects with Rodrigo and Elkin, and I know there's not a whole lot that can be said about them because they're in the experimental phase. But can you talk a little bit about, like, what you got to do and some of the creative projects that we're going to be hopefully seeing some fruits of in a little bit?
Yeah, so when I went down, I brought some things, ingredients from similar industries of fermenting things. And so uh, throughout the years of being a coffee roaster, talking a lot about coffee process and fermentation, I've had a lot of ideas, and I've mentioned these things to Rodrigo over the years, and so this is our point to kind of bring it all together and see if some of the wild stuff that I dreamt up, if Rodrigo can bring it to reality, and he is very excited to do so, and he thinks that he should, and um, I'm honored because he's telling me that I've inspired him to do something with my idea, which was only inspired by what he was doing in the first place. So it's kind of this great circular cycle of inspiring each other.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
as well as since I've been back from Colombia, my mind is just going like, what if we did this? What if we did that? Now that I've seen it. Um, so basically, I brought down some different yeasts and microbiology, things that are not um, really available, or if they are affordable, to Rodrigo and his partners. Um, and yeah, and so you know, I left over the weekend, and Rodrigo told me on Monday he's going to start some fermentation. So I'll probably message him later and see if he did,
That's
which I'm sure he
exciting.
did because they're very motivated, and they, like we were talking about before, they do like to move fast with these things.
That's awesome.
So yeah, basically the idea is to um, kind of introduce some different microbiology to facilitate the fermentations. And then we have some other products that we want to potentially add. So, technically, co fermentations, but we're kind of looking at some things that are not necessarily fruit co fermentations that are tried to give a coffee a very heavy fruity profile. Um, Maybe things that are going to enhance um, sweetness a little bit more, but potentially co-ferments that might taste a little bit more uh, like a traditional coffee with
Yeah,
really elevated levels of sweetness in certain areas,
I love it.
and hopefully creating some flavors that we maybe have never tasted in a coffee profile so far.
That's exciting. I think both of us would agree that some of our favorite coffees are those like high fermentation washed coffees. The washed coffees that seem to have that little bit of extra, and you don't see that in the co-ferments that we've tried, and we've tried a lot of co-ferments, and talking about enhancing the sweetness of that like almost everyday drinker to really elevate that would be that's something special. So that's very exciting. I
Yeah.
guess to kind of wrap it up here, what and you sort of touched on it with what you're talking with this circle of inspiration, which is something that is incredibly true all the way down. I mean, I feel it when making the packaging, and like it's one of my favorite things to see in action. And as far as that circle of inspiration, do you come home from something like this looking at the coffees we have lined up to profile the next trip that you come down in a week or so? Like, are you looking at these things differently at this point? Or is there things that you got to take away from seeing, like, from tasting the blueberry slurry that's in a blue barrel and like things like that? Like, is that allow you to look at roasting these coffees differently?
Um, I don't know if that's the thing. There's a little bit of, I would say, inputs that I've gained in terms of how I want to maybe approach or alter a little bit the approach to roasting. Um, and it's mostly based on the level of fermentation that some of these coffees are hitting, because that's one thing that I've been noticing is in a world of coffee or high end coffees, whether they're naturals or co-ferments, all of these coffees are experiencing vastly different environments of fermentation and fermentation times. And that really affects the physical bean a lot, whether it's, you know, the cellular structure, how that bean develops, how it roasts, how it takes on heat. So that's kind of where, really understanding the full extent of the fermentation and
Yeah,
what that's doing to the bean and how it's breaking down the bean, um, is kind of more of what is altering my idea of how I want to apply heat when I want to, and those types of things in the roasting process to
that
better
makes sense.
preserve all of these amazing flavors that are being put into uh, that are Rodrigo's work is being used to put into these coffees.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for taking time to catch up even after being so just getting adjusted back to being home and everything. I know it takes a minute, so I really appreciate it and yeah, stoked to hear more about this and get to try the end results of all these amazing experiments.
Yeah, it should be super fun. Thank you, and enjoy the coffee art party, everybody.
Yeah. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
All right, later, bro.
Bye. Oh.